Hi, I'm Jessica Bagley.
And I'm Cece Bell, and we are the In-Betweeners.
Betweeners.
Do we need to do that again? Let's do
Yeah.
and
we are
we are the
the
In-Betweeners.
in-betweeners.
We are the In-Betweeners.
We are the in-betweeners. Yeah, that sounds even though we said it. I'm Jessica Bagley.
And I'm Cece Bell, and we are
The in-betweeners.
yeah. Jessica Bagley is an author and illustrator of incredible picture books for kids, like Books for Papa and Laundry Day, and even my favorite, Before I Leave.
And Cece Bell is also an author and illustrator of such amazing works as El Defo, one of my most favorite books of all time, and other very hilarious books for kids.
So the point of this show, as Jessica knows, and I will share with you, is that we're living in this time in which we should really be asking each other questions about each other's lives, but we are afraid to ask these questions. So we decided that we would ask each other questions so that maybe you guys could get informed about different walks of life.
And Cece Bell and I have something very in common, is that both of us have been living in between worlds our whole lives. I've been living in between the world of being both Black and white, and Cece has been living both in between the world of hearing and deafness. So we thought that would be a really perfect combination to talk to each other and learn about each other and about how these differences have made us who we are.
So what we're doing, we're hoping to make this a series, and we want to ask each other about 3 questions each, and each session will be a different theme. And today's theme is about labels. And I will ask the first question, and the first question is for Jessica, because you're the only one here, Jessica.
I am? Oh, I am. Hi. Hey, everybody.
And you sent me an email recently that said that you really do not like labels. So my question for you is, why do you not like labels?
I don't like labels because I think my whole life I felt like when you label anything as one thing, then you're only allowing the world to see it through that one lens. And so I've always had a problem with that. Like anything in my life, like I don't like to label myself as one thing. There's just so many dimensions, I feel like, to me as a person. And while I do understand that labels help identify people, I think sometimes it can limit other people's opinions of you and view of you.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah, it's just sort of, they keep you as one thing, and you want to be many things.
Yeah.
And right. Well, that makes perfect sense. And on that note, I'll go ahead and ask my next question.
Okay.
Which was if there were any particular labels that sort of set you off, that you just really dislike.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think because I grew up a little bit quick background of me, I am mixed race, and my mom is Black and my father was white. He was Jewish. And I think that ironically, both of those labels sort of triggered me because I felt kind of caught in between both worlds. So the label of white, I didn't identify with that because I have brown skin. And so that was a very triggering sort of label to be like labeled as half white. It felt like it put me in this corner. And also even being labeled as half Black, because for me, I didn't quite understand what that meant, because I grew up in an environment that was actually predominantly white. My mother is Black and she raised me, but everywhere I went to school in my communities were white. And so I think that being labeled as Black, I identified with the fact that most of the people in my surroundings either didn't have familiarity with that or it was a negative for them. So I think that oddly being labeled as one or the other was very triggering for me. And even the phrase African American was something that triggered different feelings in me, because I was like, well, I'm not from Africa, I'm an American, so what does that mean? So kind of all labels, I think, with race for me triggers different feelings, actually.
That's really interesting. When you said something about just then, what was negative to your classmate, the fact that you were mixed race, was that seen as a negative by your classmates, do you think?
Well, I think that they didn't see me as mixed race. They saw me as Black because I have brown skin. So that is
Oh,
something.
I see what you mean.
Yeah. So I think that that is something that that people don't realize, that I can be mixed race and I can self-identify as that. But the world doesn't always see me as that, and they don't treat me as that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. The world sees you as a Black person.
Or
If they don't know you.
if they don't know me, they would either say I'm a Black person, or they would altogether question my ethnicity just in its entirety. I've got a lot of
Right.
questions of, what are you in my life?
Mm.
That's a huge question that I would get.
You do get that question.
What are you? Yeah,
What
which
are
sounds,
you?
I'm all, well, I am a human.
Is that your
And
answer? Is that what
that
you
is
usually say? What do you usually
on
say?
most days, human would be a good answer for me. Maybe not every day.
Oh man. I would not want to be on the receiving end of that question. Well, I mean,
Well,
anytime somebody asks you a question, like for me, are you deaf? You know, part of it is in the tone. Oh, are you deaf? Are you
yeah,
deaf? You know, listen to me. Are you deaf? There's so many ways you can ask that question that it depends on how that question is asked and the words you use. If, you know, I can imagine, what are you almost sounds like, you know, why are you here?
exactly.
You're not allowed to be here. You know?
That's exactly what it feels like. It does. It
Yeah.
feels kind of like an attack, because that's such a big question to ask.
It
Like,
is.
what are you? Like, it does. It feels like, are you an alien from another planet? Sort of a
Yeah,
question. So
exactly.
and it's you actually reminded me of a question I was going to ask you, if that's okay. As
That's
it
totally fine.
ropes in. So in regards to your hearing, do you have a label that you feel that you identify with most?
This is a tricky question. I think the label that I identify most with now as an adult is deaf, but that the lowercase d. But when you say the word deaf, people don't know that you're saying it with a lowercase d. And the lowercase d is basically for deaf people like myself who generally use technology to help them hear. And some of us sign and some of us don't use sign language. Whereas the capital D deaf community is more people who use sign language as their main that's their main language. And they don't always embrace hearing aids for lots of different reasons. Hearing aids can be really obnoxious and not
Wow.
perfect and everything. So one thing that, and I'm speaking for you a little bit here, if that's okay, that what we're saying on this show is just a reflection of our own personal experiences. And, you know, I'm probably getting some of this wrong because it's a very tricky stuff to talk about sometimes. But I'm a lowercase deaf person because I use hearing aids and I don't sign. I lip read, and and my whole family was hearing and is hearing. And so I just sort of ended up more in the hearing world than in the deaf world. And so made some decisions that make me a lowercase d person.
That's so amazing. I think that to have those subtle distinctions is something that is I hearing you say that, it makes me realize that the nuances that I have felt about my race and about my experiences, in the world, it relates very similarly. There's so many different, ways of looking at something, and you are right. Like I am speaking off of my experiences only. I'm not speaking for any group of people, even other mixed race people. Like everybody's having different experiences, but I think that your definition of the lowercase d versus the uppercase d, that's huge, because that's something that you think about. It sounds like your whole life, that subtle difference, that you've known a subtle difference in there.
Right.
And did you feel like that, since we were talking about trigger words or things that sort of made a reaction happen in you regarding your hearing, what are some of the words that you felt like triggered you, inside of all of those subtleties?
That I think it's interesting that right now the phrase that is the accepted phrase is hard of hearing, and I absolutely hate that phrase. Hard of hearing, it sounds so antiquated. It sounds like I should be walking around with a big horn in my ear, hey? It's just, but sometimes you just have to find the label that most people accept. And for some reason, that's the label that most people are accepting right now. And the other label, which I grew up with, was hearing impaired. And that has sort of a negative connotation because, like I have something wrong with me, but I grew up with that. And before I was comfortable saying deaf, I was comfortable saying hearing impaired. I was much more comfortable with that than hard of hearing.
Wow. And it
And
was
I don't know exactly why.
just the way, like
Just,
what you were saying, like the tone and the feeling that it gave you,
yeah,
that dictated the difference of how you received that label.
yeah. So hard of hearing isn't exactly a trigger thing, but it's that kind of, I don't want that. I don't want that. And the other trigger word is when people, especially kids, mispronounce the word deaf, and they say, "Are you deaf?" And so, I always picture myself with a sickle, and I've come. It is your time. I have come to get you. I am deaf.
Does that happen a lot?
All the time.
Really?
All the time. In school visits, are you still deaf? Yes. You better watch it, kid.
They have a lot in store for that school visit if you were deaf.
I am deaf.
What would you do for a drawing activity if you were deaf showing up? That's a whole other episode.
Yeah, exactly.
Drawing with death.
But that was a trigger when I was a kid because it aggravated me. But as an adult, I think it's funny. You change a lot as you grow up. You change your mind about things, and I've changed my mind about some of those labels.
I think I understand, because I feel the same also, especially with the climate of, things right now. I am constantly trying to figure out what feels comfortable for me. It, like in real time now, like I had made decisions about things, about how I wanted to be, like what I wanted people to call me, and like how I felt about myself. And I find that right now I'm actually trying to understand that in a new way.
Right. That makes perfect sense. I think writing El Defo changed my mind about a lot of things. It wasn't until after I finished this book and was talking about it that I actually called myself deaf. And I
Wow.
was finally comfortable using that word, and not only comfortable, but just happy to use it. Almost like, oh, that's what I should have been saying all along. Why wasn't I saying this all along? But every now and then I still have trouble. It all depends on who you're talking to. And I'm sure you've had this too, that you change what you say about yourself based on the social interaction you're having. And
Yeah, it's very, very true. I think, especially with regard to race, I'm seeing now that, like, we're talking about labels, and like, people are, the word white is becoming much more a front of a conversation. And I see that that makes people very uncomfortable.
right,
And it's interesting to me because my entire growing up, whiteness like was like, I didn't realize this until reflecting on it now, but like to be white and whiteness was, I was sort of taught in very subtle, unconscious ways that that is better.
right,
And so that now people are afraid of calling themselves white and labeling themselves as white, they find very offensive, which is, it's something very, like, we're talking about questions and thinking, and we don't have answers to everything, but I think it's the thinking about it is the answer, right? So like, why would that word make somebody feel a certain way? Why does it bring up feelings in them? And as such, being labeled as African American, like I said, like, that was something that when I was younger, I didn't associate myself with, because I knew that I was mixed race. I didn't even know if I liked to use the words mixed race. I didn't like the words biracial. I felt like that there was something antiquated in that. Like,
absolutely.
it
Kind of
feels
like hard
like,
hearing, biracial.
yeah,
Yeah,
biracial.
yeah,
Like, but I do know for I know that there are people that prefer that,
right,
that label for themselves. It's not so much, I think, like these, it's like the in-betweeners, right? It's like, we don't have a defined thing. We are all like kind of living inside of things. And
right.
like you said, that can change as you get older. And yeah, this is all very interesting.
It is. But
um yeah, go ahead.
you've been talking about African American
Yeah.
as a label and then Black as a label. And it felt like with the Black Lives Matter movement that all of a sudden there was this shift, and everybody, not everybody, but a lot more people, and myself included, felt like, well, maybe we're supposed to be using the word Black and not African American. African American to me always sounded like something a white person made up to try to make Black people or African Americans, comfortable. I don't know how that all came to be. But my question to you is, do you have a preference right now? And do you think, or rather, a more specific question would be, what should white people be saying?
That's such a good question. I think that the answer, it's kind of like, you know like, I because I'm only speaking for me and my feelings. I think that asking the if we could all feel comfortable asking each other, like, hey, like how we've been trying to get more comfortable with pronouns. That's a really great comparison, I think. And it's different for every person, right?
Right.
She, her, he, him, they, them, they. I think that there's so many things that it's specific to the person. I think that I don't have an answer of what I feel like that I'm comfortable with all white people calling all Black people, because my experiences with those words are going to feel different. But I will say that, from my personal perspective, I think that the reason why it is important to say black and white right now is because we are in a phase where people are trying to understand the history, and those words are so loaded that it is actually really important that we use those terms, because, you know, for so long, black was something that I feel like that we were taught was a negative thing. It was like, it's like bad to be black, you know, into the darkness, like, you know, like anything that you think about in terms of like good versus evil in our vernacular is always compared to light and dark. And for me, as somebody, you know, who is you know, I have I have darker brown skin. We all have brown skin. It's the conversation that we all have melanin. We technically are all very differing shades of brown. You know, I think that those are things that I'm thinking about. So like, what does that word mean? And I think Black Lives Matter, it has to be said right now, because it does the thing. It's kind of putting it in everybody's face. Like, you need to see me as somebody that identifies as black, even if it's even if it's not like both of my parents were black and everybody in my family's black. Like, it's not that. It's a way to confront it. It's a way to like really put it out there and say, you know, like, our lives matter, you know. And everybody's, we can talk about that another time.
Oh my gosh.
I won't even say the phrase right now, but I think that like, you know, it is important to say those things because we're having a real time discussion. And I know that everybody wants to sort of, I think that most people want to not have to live in a world where we have to make distinctions like that and have those distinctions have implications about class or worth or value or belonging. But we're not there yet. So we're in the doing work phase, you know? So I think it is really important. It is important to, you know, to like, okay, well, if our history in America is based off of the differences of black and white, we need to talk about that. And we need to say those words, and we need to understand what those words mean, because once you say it out loud, you start to think about it. And, you know, I think African-American, to your point, I think it probably was something that was created to soften things, maybe make more inclusion and make more identified that, you know, you are an African who was brought to America. But in reality, you know, Americans are Americans if you're born here. You know, when people were brought here over 400 years ago, you know, their next generation of children are just Americans, you know.
Right.
And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, that people shouldn't use the phrase. If it's comfortable, they should use the phrase and identify with African American. But I think as a whole, saying the words black and white are actually very important right now. And maybe we won't need them, you know, one day. But right now, I think we have to, unfortunately, show those labels and try to dissect them, I guess.
Wow, that's a great answer and very helpful information. And I would also guess that not every Black person in America can claim that they have African heritage. I mean, not every single. I don't know.
I mean, I would say if you are any black, then yes, then you have somebody in your family that is black. But I am learning more now, because I'm trying to understand the history better, that all black people have whiteness in their family at some point. That was something I didn't ever really think about. Obviously I knew it for my family, but I think in these ways that we still don't quite understand that that they're like, if we all did our DNA, you know, like, and we're you know, generations of in Americans, we actually are all quite connected. And that's something that is you know, people don't 100% like know.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I had a question. I had one more question for you that kind of goes back, that I was going to jump on when we were talking about labels before. You know, and I was talking a lot about like some of those labels, they have negative connotations, you know, for me personally, and maybe for others that are similar to me. How did you feel growing up and now, when deafness is or was labeled as a disability? Was that something that was hard for you, or did it make you have feelings?
Definitely. that's another word that is one of those imperfect words that is just sort of the accepted word of the day. And disability, for a while there, it was differently abled, which, oh, I don't know. It's just funny how you can't exactly explain why it makes you feel the way it makes you feel. I think differently abled is almost maybe a little bit like African American, a way to soften, you're
It's like we kind of forget
able,
our
you just
differences,
do it.
right?
Yeah. You're just doing it differently. And disability, we need that label because we need to have, the rights for disabled people. It sort of groups us together. And when you're fighting for something that you need, it's your disability rights kind of thing. But it still implies that you're not as good at something. And yes, I know I'm not as good at hearing, but that's just a fact, And I almost wish it was something like, she just has some trouble hearing now and then, Yeah, but that's a mouthful, You can't just say you need something short and sweet. And so I guess I'm okay with it. But it just feels like more like this is a part of my life that is.
Yeah.
And it's not even I don't see it as not being able to do something. It's just this thing. There's something that maybe is a little more difficult, but it's not. I'm sort of insulted in a way by,
Really?
A little bit. Just, I don't know. This is another one of those, to each his own. Some people like really embrace the term, and that's awesome. And there's a part of me that does embrace that term because, there's pride in it. I have a disability and I'm tough and I'm strong and I'm getting through it. But also you just want to be, And I think that kind of all comes back to your dislike of labels, which may very well be my dislike too, now that I think about it. It's just, you're getting labeled and you don't want to be labeled. You just want to be.
You just want to be, I think. Yeah. And that was, I think, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, because I think we kind of keep going back. Like it's like our circles keep overlapping, like we're it's like a Venn diagram. Like we just keep going over the same sort of the similarities, while we're talking about different things. I think that the similarities of what we're talking about are very real. Like we don't want to be, we don't want to be like decided of who we are based upon the things that, that describe us, in a more, in one way to the world, like I don't want to be judged by just the color of my skin. I don't want to move through the world always having to think about that, but I do. And I think that it's a similar thing for you. And we just want to be able to be ourselves and talk about silly things and make artwork and enjoy the things that we love.
Exactly. So maybe we should say bye to everybody. And, and hopefully we will do this again.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Well, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everybody.